From ContainerDays Hamburg, this video is proudly presented by Dux IT.
I only have this title because they asked me for the talk title 4 months ago, and I gave them this title to get them off my back. But it is interesting to me that after 10 years of talking about containers a lot, that we're still talking about containers. And I'm thinking, is it time to move on? I know for a lot of you, you're probably caught up in the AI hype wave. How many people are all in on AI at the moment? How many people are lying? There's a few of you all right now with ChatGPT running on your laptop. It's okay, that's the next trend. The landscape keeps getting super big. So every time I look at it, there's another row, another column, another tab. And it seemed like it just keeps on growing. And I think a big reason that we're still talking about containers, I'll save that for a moment. In tech, I've been through maybe 3 or 4 of these hype cycles. I went through the Linux hype cycle when it was replacing AIX and Solaris. Everyone got super excited. And I was there when DevOps was like a thing. And I went from writing shell scripts to using Puppet, Chef, and Ansible, sometimes all 3 for some odd reason. And then while I was working at Pupper Labs on configuration management, Docker came out. And I immediately thought that if I didn't switch to Golang and learn Docker, that I would get left behind. So I quit. I'm done with configuration management. That's the old thing. And I moved on to writing Go code, working on containers, ended up at CoreOS, and started working on things like distributed systems, etcd, and of course this thing we call Kubernetes. But through all of those transitions, I remember a lot of people in the business world especially, and some of us techies too, we would always say that it's not about the technology, it's about the business. Has anyone ever heard that phrase? I hate that phrase. I hate it with a passion, because a business only works because of the collection of people that do what they do at every particular layer of that business. And of course, some people would say artificial intelligence is where it's all at and everything will change. And so I'm going to address that it's all about the business. This is my favorite tool company of all time. They happen to be German. Do you all know this company? How many of you have Knippix tools? How many of you know how to actually use those tools? Yeah, just like in tech, a lot of people have tools they don't even use. And so my favorite tool company ever. And if you think about it, their business is selling the best pliers and cutting tools. And I clicked around it. I said, I wonder if they mentioned Docker or Kubernetes anywhere. What do you all think? So I clicked around, and of course, you hit the products, and it's all of these products that they sell to people. These are some specialized tools, highly regarded in the industry. And then I went to the About Us page. I was like, surely they're going to talk about how important the technology stack is to this tool company. And I was scrolling down, and there's nothing. But there's this component. Our fundamental idea is to focus, and only as specialists have we been able to offer our customers top performance and survive against global competition. They're not making all the tools. They don't make power tools. They don't make all of these other things that some of the other tool manufacturers make. They focus on a very limited, I mean, they still make a lot of tools, but it's definitely in a very limited domain. And I'm thinking about this, it's like, why do they do this? And it helps me answer that question, why are we still talking about containers? And the truth is because that's our area of focus. We enable a lot of things to do what they do above the stack or above the line in which we operate by being really, really good at this layer. And the truth is, this layer is far from finished. If you've been a part of any of these technology cycles, if you ever worked at any of the companies building this stuff, you know that we do just enough to ship that release and to take advantage of that hype cycle. All the VC money is flowing in, And we all want to move fast because we know it's only a matter of time before competition shows up. And once the competition shows up, it's only a matter of time before Red Hat, Microsoft, or Amazon buys them all. And then it's only a little bit more time before you run out of cash and the project is over. This is how a lot of these hype cycles go. And guess what we never get to do? We never get to finish these things. We get good enough to be in production. We get good enough to actually get customers, and we start the feedback loop. If you've ever built something and had to support it in production, the feedback loop is what creates the biggest mess. Every customer says, just add this feature, then I can use it. And after 7 years working at a large cloud provider, they asked me for a summary. What did you learn in these 7 years? No matter what new technology comes out, everyone wants you to make the new thing work the old way. Hey, Kelsey, when will Kubernetes support Juniper? It's like, Juniper switches? Yeah, that's what we have. We want to see that surfaced inside of Kubernetes. And before you know it, you have enterprise Kubernetes. Everyone's laughing here, but you probably are buying enterprise Kubernetes distributions. Why? Because this is what happens in this cycle. So we're at year number 10, 12, or 14, depending on how you're counting. And if you zoom out, it's a mess. So we say words like complexity. You wish it was simpler. You wish we would consolidate the layers. I use the word, it's a mess. And then the funny thing that happens in my career in tech, you hire this person that's really, really excited, and they come in and say, we should rewrite everything in Rust. You may have been this person. And sometimes, not all the times, the problem with this person is they write one service and leave. So now we have Python, Haskell, Golang, Java, and now Rust. Because this is the fourth time we've allowed someone to come in, make a mess, and then leave. So we're at that part of the curve where we all have made a mess. Now, half of you have jumped ship to the AI world, and you're going to leave what's left for other people to finish. What is there to finish exactly? What's the trend in this container landscape? I consider myself out of the game. I am retired. I was visiting Vienna 3 days ago, and I was explaining this concept of early retirement. And he couldn't believe that there was this thing you can do where you could just stop working and not worry about some pension. I was like, yeah, that's a thing that we do. And so I'm so far from the game that I can only keep track of the big picture trends. And so here's what I'm observing in the container space. The container community did a fantastic job of building the current ecosystem. And when AI wave came, I wasn't sure if the AI community would just reinvent the wheel, or would they use components from this era? The one picture I want you to have in your head is, have you seen, there's soccer here. What do you guys call it, football? When I took my daughter to play soccer, I'm watching the World Cup, and it's like, wow, look at all this strategy. There's so much nuance into the game. And when you watch children play soccer, what do? They all run to the ball. The coach is yelling, spread out. They don't. They just go. Even the goalie leaves the net. It's like, what? You're the goalie. Stay there. And sometimes I watch this with these hype waves. People leave the net, and they run towards the ball, and all the other things left vulnerable or unfinished. So what's the big trends that I see? I was watching the Apple keynote, just like everybody else, early June. And I saw this release. I was like, supercharges the tools and technologies for developers. I'm like, a bunch of marketing stuff. Now, I use macOS, and I feel guilty sometimes, but just know that they are a certified Unix. And so it's still legit if you're a system administrator to use. Don't wave your hands. It's totally legit. Look, we even have a terminal. Look, I can run LS. I have all the tools. And so every year I get excited about, are they going to invest in the Unix layer, because there were a few years where they made a big deal. They even put the words Unix on Apple's website because it was that important to them that the user land was compatible with the way developers were building things. So this year I'm scrolling. I'm like, I tried to write Swift code, and I just couldn't do it. Liquid glass, I don't know. But we're all going to be forced to use it. This is definitely not for me. And you keep scrolling. And I'm like, this is all nonsense for me. And then I came across this, and I was like, oh my God. Are you serious? What does this mean? So macOS is deciding that they should have a native containerization framework built in. I was like, well, how would you do it? And so it was open source. I was like, really? Like on GitHub open source? Like, yeah, GitHub open source. Well, I'm not using anything that doesn't have enough stars. I was like, oh, 19,000 stars. Okay. I'm clicking around. And the one thing that was really interesting to me was I always go to the contributors. Always want to know who's working on these projects. So Docker kind of changed the game that you could actually run Linux containers anywhere, macOS, Windows, and of course Linux. But boy, did they have to hack a lot of things to make this work. And so I'm scrolling down, and I'm trying to figure out if I recognize any names, and Michael Crosby jumps out. If you don't know who Michael Crosby is, he's one of the earlier Docker employees that spent a lot of time listening to engineers and how they use the tools and making those things work inside of Docker itself to move this thing forward. And he helped get Docker all the way to that 10-year mark we like to talk about, where a lot of engineers moved on. It seems Michael moved to Apple to do the non-sexy work, the non-hype-related work, which is to finish the mission and move containerization natively in the OS. I think there's going to be a whole class of problems that get solved when you have containerization built into the operating system at a very low level where you can start to take advantage of all the trusted computing stuff if you're into that. You can't do that when you layer on agents on top. There are things that can only be done when you're fully integrated. So if you ever get a chance to, you should definitely play with this framework, because I think I can only imagine my time at CoreOS if I could be guaranteed that there's going to be a container runtime on every machine without telling them to go download some other tool first. Maybe we wouldn't have package manager sprawl if we knew that we had this kind of technology across every operating system. I was going to run a little bit of the demo component, but you can do it yourself just to show how legit this is, because this person was trying to make fun of me about me using macOS. But all the commands work. Everything's super fast. Even Docker files work in this mode. And again, they're not even running the Docker daemon. They still respect the architecture, so everything's OCI compliant. Very similar workflow. Of course, the command line tool is called container. You take your Docker files, you build them just like any other. I don't know why I'm building images at a demo, but that's crazy. Similar output, my guess is this is Michael Crosby's input from his time at Docker. And I'm thinking to myself that in maybe 3 to 4 years, every Mac probably will have something like this built in by default. I have no inside information, but maybe there's a world where the App Store is replatformed in this world. What if you're able to sign container images and avoid the annoying security warnings when you're running software that didn't come from the App Store on an Apple system? I think this is a game changer. And the nice thing about this kind of work is being done after the hype cycle. These developers get to work in actual peace. There is no competition war going on at this level. This is now, we've had 10 years of learning. What should we fix? What should we have done different? And now we finally get to see what that will actually look like. Now, one thing that people don't know is my first Unix operating system was FreeBSD. Anyone know what this project is? And you think you hardcore and you don't know what the BSDs are. You have a lot to learn, my friend. So FreeBSD was the first Unix operating system that I had access to. It was open source. That's where I learned most of my Unix commands, how to do shell scripting, and the basics of system administration. And they've had what we call containers, they call jails for a long time. And they don't do a lot of like net new features that a lot of attention gets poured into. But they do, when you read their documentation, their container implementation predates Docker by like 14 years. So if you want to see some of this stuff in action, I encourage you to kind of read some of the history around jails. And I just checked in on this project to ask, are they doing anything new in this area? And the next release for FreeBSD, they're adding this thing called service jails. And I think this is from them observing the benefit of not just having an OS kind of virtualization layer, but moving all the way up the stack to the application side of the equation. And so now they have an easy way for you to think about process isolation at the application level. And so even they are going back to something that they helped start all those years ago, and they're taking new ideas from this last 10 years that we created, and they found room for improvement. And so I'm like, okay, at some point, we're all going to have a default container runtime in all the operating systems we have out of the box. My guess is there's going to be a whole new set of tools, and we might see consolidation at the package manager level. If I had to predict something, I think this will be true in the next 5 or 10 years, that the containerization will be standardized across all operating systems, and the tools we use will just assume it's going to be there. Now, the last thing here before we get into the Q&A session is the next part of the talk, which is pretty short. I have to talk about AI. It's in my speaker contract. And I thought about, like, what would I say about AI? Then the first thing that came to mind is, like, you got to make it bigger. And it wasn't big enough. And if you want to raise money for your new company, this is all you need. 3 slides, say AI enough, and you're good to go. And that's where I stopped, too. I am going to talk a little bit about my stance on AI. And you got to remember, I'm a retired person that has probably had every enterprise IT job there is. I've written code in multiple languages. I shipped lots of open source projects. I played many roles in this industry over 25 years. I really love the ability to gain new skills and provide value to people all around the world. So technology is personal for me. It's not just another job. It wasn't always about productivity. There were situations where I would build a prototype, stand back, look at it, and throw it away, because it was just a learning exercise so it can go off and build the better thing. So as I evolved as an engineer, I evolved as a person. And so when I step back from afar and I look at model training and feeding all this data and inference, I'm thinking about the career that I went through and all of the steps that we took for training your own model. And so one part of me wants to reject it outright. One part of me wants to say, why do we want to replace so many people? And I get everyone's vision of AI isn't just replacing people and having the machines do the job of their coworkers. That can only go so far. And there's a bunch of ethic things around what these things do. If I was a practitioner right now, would I learn these tools? The answer is yes. Every time a new piece of technology has come out during my working career, I've always sat down with it, and I want to learn where it was strong, where it was weak, more importantly, how it works. And then one thing that I know is from my open source work, you don't have to accept how it works right now. You can actually change it to be whatever you want. It doesn't mean you're going to get funding. It doesn't mean you're going to build the next great company. But no one's going to stop you from putting your ideas down and competing with all the other ideas that are out there. And so for me, I said, all right, let me not be so biased about this technology. And so when I was doing a little bit of research around the containerization stuff, I noticed that I had to click on a bunch of websites. I'm scrolling through all this documentation. And then half of the documentation I needed was in like this guy's blog post that is not in the official docs, but is important. So you bookmark them all. And if you're like me, this is what your world ends up like over time. You're hunting for things. And so, you know what? Let me give this LLM thing a try. Now, I did work at Google for 7 years, so AI was everywhere. But this LLM craze is new, especially the way people think about it, like generative AI. And one of the arguments that I heard around why generative AI is being accepted at more of a faster rate than we would expect is because a lot of people complain that it generates mediocre code. It generates mediocre Terraform configs, right? You would say this stuff is mediocre. Now, sit back and think about it. Most of the stuff we generate is mediocre too. Really mediocre. I've seen people go get a new tool. What is the first thing you do? You go to the Getting Started guide, and you copy and paste without reason nor logic. You paste it into your IDE or text editor, and you run it. Some of you will put this into production if it works. And then when it stops working, what do? You start hunting for best practices. You haven't even been practicing. And you're already looking for best practices. You skipped a step. You skipped the model training step, the part where you explore. You learn and fine-tune your understanding of the problem. And I think what I've learned in this exploration of mine is that context matters more than you could imagine. And so the first thing I did was something simple. I am uninterested in code generation, even though I have turned it on for some of the open source libraries I maintain. Every once in a while in my IDE, I would just do a check-in to see how good autocomplete is these days, especially the AI-assisted autocomplete. And some of it is pretty decent, but I'm not necessarily the biggest advocate or fan, but I'm not here to complain about AI. But I do want to show kind of my adventure so far. So the first problem I wanted to solve was this documentation problem. There's two problems with documentation. One is the discovery problem. I don't even know what's in here. And I don't know how to articulate what I want to do, what's inside of this documentation. So the thing that I wanted to try was, I'm going to start a new window, and if it breaks, because this stuff breaks, I'll just come back to this window. So the first thing I did was download Olama, backed by container images. The models come from places like Hugging Face. So the container community did a good job because these new tools decided to leverage that existing technology. So I asked a question, something simple. What version of FreeBSD is required for service jails? Remember, that's that new thing, not the thing that came out 14 years before Docker, so 24 years ago. So I hit enter, and now all of my battery is going to go away so I can get this one query. But it's AI, so it's totally worth it. All right, so this thing is thinking not the way you think, but it's pretty cool that it's actually going through some of its process trying to explain where it's coming from. And this is the first thing that kind of turned me off about this whole thing. This thing is lying. I don't know if it's lying on purpose or does it know, and I can't understand which one is worse. And so when you walk up to someone, you ask them a question, and if they don't know the answer, what would you rather them say? I don't know. I was asking for direction, and the person said this way and then this way, and walked away. And I walked this way, and that was not the way at all. I don't think this person knew the way. He just wanted to say something to look helpful. And this is doing it right now in front of us. This thing is saying, hey, the short answer is FreeBSD 13. This came out like what, 5, 6, 7 years ago? This is not the answer. How do I know this isn't the answer? It's because I read the documentation. So this is what we do when we're in our junior phases of our career, mid phases of our career, all these collective things we go through. We're kind of training our own models. And so this is why I think people that have a bit of experience they can use tools like this because even when this happens, they'll know that this isn't right, and they'll just write another prompt or 2,000-page MD file to make sure that this thing stays on track. But each his own. I'm not here to complain. And so I look at this and said, I don't get it. And I went on the internet, the last place you should go to complain about anything. And I went to the internet and was like, is this supposed to be the thing that changes everything? It's like, yes, Kelsey, you're using it wrong. I was like, it's my fault. And at some point, there was someone who was actually helpful. And this person said, it's an anti-pattern to ask an LLM a question that you haven't already given it the answer. What the hell does that mean, and why is that important? I know the directions. It's this way and then that way. Which way should I go? So, Kelsey, thank you for asking for directions. You should go this way and then that way. It's like, it sounds insane that you would have to do this. And so I thought about it myself. It's like, yeah, like how would it know? It shouldn't know. It's not magic. I don't like when things are magic. And this isn't magic. And so when you think about all the documentation that's scattered all over the place, Stack Overflow, examples on GitHub, what happens when you take all of those things and you aggregate them and you use it as context for your prompt? And this, for me, was when the light bulb goes off. This isn't magic. This current state of this thing just needs some context. So what did I do? I went to the FreeBSD website, and what I did was actually went to the blog post because it actually had a bit more information, mainly this context here, that this will be available in the 15 release. And so what I did was file print, and I saved it as a PDF. So on my machine, there is a PDF of this blog post, right? We do this all the time. We call them books, but we store all of this knowledge, ideally to tune our own models and make references to them. Well, this is no different. And so in this case, what I did was I'm moving this PDF that I took to add context. So that entire website and all the text there has the answer I want. I'm going to explain why this is important because, as you all remember from earlier, all of this information is spread out all over the place. And I'm not going to remember where to look all the time. Sometimes Google fails me or there's too many ads and I give up. You can say that when you're no longer working there. And now I can ask the same question. What version of FreeBSD jails is required for FreeBSD jails? We'll try it now. Let's see what we get. I like the way it pretends it's thinking. And so in this case, it gives me the real answer, FreeBSD 15. And once I kind of understood this way of thinking about interacting with these models, it's an anti-pattern to ask it a question where you haven't already given its answer. So you can call that your RAG implementation, MCP, where you connected to things like Prometheus and Kubernetes, or your database. Maybe you shouldn't connect your LLM to your database, but that's a whole different talk. If you ever see a talk like that, you should go see it. Because that additional context is what makes some of this stuff work. So I think in the work that we do, I can imagine some people looking at this as a local search engine, as long as you have that local context, or a way to think about all the examples you would typically go to Stack Overflow. So I do like this. I'm going to go return to the last part of the talk. Why did we talk about containers? It's not finished yet. There's a bunch of work to be done. Sure, there's this new hype wave. But anyone that's still working on this stuff, you're the people that will mature this to actually get to the final mile. It's going to be 30 years before this thing is super solid. It took, Linux is at, 32 years? So we have a ways to go. So if you're working on this area, thank you for your service, and we're going to jump to Q&A. Thank you.
If you have prepared questions.
So I'm going to read them in order. So has retiring from tech taught you something you wish you would have known earlier in your career? Oh, so the reason I retired is because 10 years prior, I asked myself, would I buy my time back if I could afford it? Right? As I look at my salary, I'm like, why would these companies pay me this kind of money? What do they see that I don't see? As I started thinking through, I spent most of my life thinking about how to get into tech. Once I got into tech, how to stay into tech. And there was a part of my career where I wanted to be the very best at something. And so I worked really, really hard to train to be the best at it, but I never stopped and thought about what it is like to leave. So the thing I learned about this is in open source, we're at a stage now where open source maintainers are literally dying from old age. It's going to be like the first time in our history of our profession where people are literally getting to the age where they can't do it anymore. Luckily for us, we can do this for a really long time. What I'm learning from this is that we got to figure out how to hand the baton much sooner than that stage. Right? When we get to that 10-year mark, if you're the maintainer, everyone knows your name, you have all the stickers at the booth, you need to be thinking about who the next maintainer is. I saw someone on LinkedIn apologizing because they're having real-life issues that are taking priority over their open source work. And they're apologizing that they're going to have to stop work on the numerous Python libraries that they maintain because this person doesn't think they can never stop. You know, sometimes they say your career is a marathon. The truth is it should be a relay race. You should be thinking about who you pass the baton to as you're starting these projects. Tee it up. So that's the number one, I think. You don't have to do the same thing forever, even if you are the maintainer of these projects. Think about your exit strategy and set someone else up for success by passing that torch. What comes after Kubernetes? Whatever you make. This was the most disappointing thing when I was at Pupper Labs. We created configuration management. We talked about having people go from legacy mind thinking around shell scripts into a declarative way of thinking about structuring our servers, adding a declarative nature to it. We were very forward thinking. We would go to every company and tell them how to adopt the future. At that very same company, when Docker comes out, it was almost forbidden to say the words. I even tried to rewrite parts of Puppet from Golang, from Ruby to Golang, and it was like, nope, Go doesn't support AIX, and some of our customers use AIX. And I was so disappointed that the people who had got us to the next wave got lost. They stopped thinking about what comes next. They stopped pushing the boundaries. And I was really surprised that Docker came from the developer community, not the operations folks. We were still trying to write a bunch of Chef and YAML scripts, and they had moved on to better abstraction. So automation, abstraction, the forever loop. You automate, and then once you're done writing that much code, you abstract. And so Kubernetes, we're at that 10-year point. I'm going to watch you all build all the Kubernetes, and the Kubernetes is going to get so big that it's going to be unusable. And then you're going to start complaining about it on the internet. And then so what comes after Kubernetes, those people are probably not here. Probably not. That person thinks Kubernetes is terrible. Why are you writing all of this YAML file? What's Crossplane and Prometheus? Why do you have 7 logging daemons in the same container image? And so that person's going to look at this whole world very differently. But the benefit is they'll get to learn from what we did well. I think the Kubernetes-style API will continue. No one's going to go back to writing random languages for this thing. Infrastructure as data, in my opinion, has been far superior than infrastructure as code. Why? Because you can have all the languages you want, all point and generate the same data stack underneath, and then interchangeable tools. We could never do that when Puppet was written in Ruby, Ansible was written in Python, and Chef was like pure Ruby and not the DSL. They just never interoperated, so we had to rewrite all the code over again. I think we're never going backwards. So the data model will stay. Maybe we have different verbs, nouns, types, objects, but that will stay. But the system underneath, my guess is we're going to collapse the layers. If anyone's going to make this happen, it's probably going to be the AI community, because they're the ones that benefit from the localization of high performance. We will probably go back to the mainframe. So 20 years, I think we're going to go back to this mainframe thing. And you're going to be like, all these local optimization, just like the transition from microservices back to monoliths. What do you think will happen? What do you think WASM will still happen? No. They invited me to their keynote like 3 years ago. I was like, you don't want me at the WASM keynote. And I remember I told them, to the WASM community, again, thank you for your service. These are important layers. I told them that WASM has already won the browser. You've won. Extensions, you've won. Celebrate, you should have a party. But you're not replacing Java. It's not happening. And I said, even if you did replace Java, the price for doing so is irrelevancy. No one's going to care. WASM gets talked about a lot now because it doesn't work. You try to bind to a socket, good luck. You want to run something with multiple threads, good luck. You want to run your favorite app in it, it might work with some compiler flags, but good luck. So there's a lot of excitement because there's work to do. But once it works, if you've ever built anything, once it works, people stop paying attention to it. So WASM has already won, is super successful, and depending on who you talk to in that arena, you don't need to have WASM become the new operating system for everything. Everyone wants to be the universal thing to everything until the next thing comes out and claims the same. I don't think they're going to ever hit that ambition. Again, that's pretty much a stake in the ground for me. I just think the world is too complex to conform to a single ABI or whatever the goals will be in the future. Atari or Amiga? Atari, because I had one. Yeah, I didn't get into computers until much later in life, so there we go. Should we run databases in Kubernetes? My favorite question. It used to be no. It used to be no, because I watched people lose their data. My guess is people are still losing their data, but the recovery tools are so much better. And so you can do it now because all of these volume snapshotting tools and restoring tools, replication tools, databases realizing that they're going to have to meet Kubernetes halfway. And they have done that since I used to be very much against it. So I think you can do it. The reason why I'm saying this is because I probably don't work there. So if you did lose all your data, it's not going to bother me. So yeah, that one's up to you. I'm still cautious on that one. What are the hype cycles you observed over time? Man, a lot of them. The Unix hype cycle with Linux taking over the world. Virtualization, I remember when VMware came out, and we started a virtual machine. Everyone stood around the server we bought just to see if this was true. And then like a few years later, you could move VM from one server to another one, and it kept running. And we thought that was going to be the future of everything. Turns out nobody cares now, but it was cool at the time. And then I went through the DevOps cycle, which was interesting because people gave a word to a thing they didn't understand. There were people that were already good at being good teammates. You see a problem, you jump in and fix it. If a problem can be solved by writing software, then you learn how to write software. If a problem can be solved by writing documentation, then you write documentation. This idea of wearing multiple hats is not a new one. So seeing people put a label on it and then try to explain the cultural assets of it was weird to me because you still didn't solve the personal problem of saying, just be helpful. If you're on a team, learn the skills necessary to be helpful. It really ain't that hard. You don't need a whole workshop for that. And then we get to configuration management, infrastructure as code, containers, Kubernetes. And then for me, everything changed the closer it got to society. When I saw crypto and the laser eyes, that's really when I decided to retire. This is going beyond the scope of what I ever intended to be in technology for. And so now I'm seeing this AI hype cycle come back again because this is the third or fourth time for it. But I think the thing that, even though this is not in the question, I think the thing that remains the same for me is that you can literally change where these things go. If you make your own open source project, maybe you give these talks, but you can actually nudge people. The number of people that I meet 5 or 6 years later that say, I saw a talk of yours, and it changed the way I thought about this thing, so I rewrote it in a different way. And then these things may go on to be big projects. So I think there's going to always be a hype cycle. You get to decide whether you be a part of it or not. I'm going to do a quick time check to make sure we don't go over anyone's time.
Oh, we still have 5 minutes if you...
We have 5 minutes. That's forever in tech years. are Mac containers native like Linux or Windows native containers? I thought it's still a Linux layer like Llama or WSL2. So question is, I don't know. If you look at the code and implementation, they have the virtualization framework, what Mac supports out of the box. So you don't need necessarily VMware Fusion. There are Swift libraries where you can create a virtual machine. And as you create that virtual machine, you can bring in a kernel and a disk image and do what you would normally do with something like KVM or QEMU or whatever your tool you're using. And so you're going to get the same type of thing, but the UX is not that great. It's like you have to orchestrate it in your code base. But given that virtualization framework, you can build another layer on top. They chose to use the VM isolation for their containerization. So in the world of Docker Desktop, if you're familiar with that, Docker takes all of your containers and put them on one VM and leverages the Linux isolation, so that's what you get. And this is where I was probably the most wrong in the last 10 years when it came to containers versus VMs. I remember someone that was really, really smart. They understood the CPU very deeply, and they're like, the OS will never be able to do what we can do in hardware. And the only way to get to the isolation level you want, you will need the CPU's help. And 10 years later, this person's right, because the cloud provider I left, a lot of them moved to micro VMs on the serverless platforms to give the CPU level isolation, and a lot of it moves into hardware for performance. So the answer to this question is the containerization framework builds on top of the virtualization framework. So when you launch a container, it's using OCI. There's a helper there to pull things from registries. It creates that file system. It uses the Linux image, I forget which one. They use the containerization framework, and they're booting this using the lightweight. So if you use the Kata containers, or if you're in your cloud provider and you're using in the serverless services, that's what you're doing, so that they went that route. So I would say this is native to macOS, and it's a first-class citizen, even though it's being bolted on during this beta phase. We'll take two more of these, maybe. Any thoughts on European sovereignty challenges? Do we even have the skills to run our own stacks without help from the US employee anymore? Ooh, this is a loaded one. I advise a company called Civo, based in the UK. And part of my advisory work, I also sit on the board as a non-executive. This conversation comes out a lot. Even when I was at GCP, this conversation came out a lot. So some of you may or may not know, there are certain countries that do operate their own cloud regions with their citizens. And right now, you definitely need those US employees because you didn't build this stuff. So there's still work that needs to happen. There's releases, there's maintenance, and you don't want to get too far from the core product, or you're just going to be on an island on your own. The sad part about this is that so much open source has become the best of breed now that there's no excuse for this. There are some countries here that have mandated things like all government software should be open source by, they always pick a date like 2030 or something. These are good goals to have. This question, Linus Torvald is from where? Where? Finland. Leonard Pottering, where is he from? I saw him 2 days ago in Berlin. So the people that are actually at the core of most of this technology live next to you. So the answer is already yes. I think the challenge here is the business part, the user experience part, the product lifecycle part. That part is maybe something where things are a little bit different because of the flow of capital, but I don't think it's about technology skills. It may be execution on the product side to get that global acceptance. So here's the last question. So with so much licensing and subscription models, will the concept of truly open source survive? This is a great question to end on. Open source will always be a thing. You can make any project you want and decide to share it or not. And I make this stance in the open source community. It doesn't matter if you accept contributions. I can just decide to share. I built a thing, I put it on GitHub, and I want no contributions from anyone, and I've closed off the GitHub issues, and it's public domain or Apache 2, and you can have it. To me, that is open source. I've given you my software. I may even write documentation to explain my approach to things, and if you want to take it and build on it, that's up to you. To me, that's very different than a commercial company wanting to have control over a project for commercial reasons. That's when we get into those type of licenses. And even in those cases, It's fine by me. If a company has restrictive terms on their license and decides to give you the software for free and maybe prohibit commercial use, I am also thankful for that software because they funded its development. If you want to compete with them, the fork button is right there in the corner. You can click it. And when you click a fork button, just understand you will now have to solve all of those open issues and feature requests. Do you really want to be in that game? So to me, open source is this huge spectrum. People are going to debate about license and subscription models. And I'll end with one thing. I think in the future, if you're a commercial entity, don't give your whole project away. Don't lie and pretend it's open source. Just give away the parts that you're happy with, but never the product. And if you're in the product business, you're literally there to make money. And in order to make money, I've never seen it. I've never seen someone pay for something that they don't have to pay for. Think about it. You go into the Ferrari dealership, and you look at all the Ferraris, and it's like, all of them are free. Or you have the option to pay 200,000 euros. I know what you're thinking. I'm going to pay the 200,000 euros. No, you will take the car for free. That doesn't work in real business. So I think open source is independent of businesses and subscription models, and even to those companies, thank you for sharing the software with us. Thank you for spending time with me.
Thank you.
From Container Days Hamburg, this video is proudly presented by DAX IT.